What's up, everybody? It's Nioh here with my impressions of Nioh. What the hell is Nioh, you ask? If I had to summarize it in one sentence, I'd say it's the aftermath of a foursome between Dark Souls, Onimusha, Ninja Gaiden, and Witcher. Imagine a faster-paced Dark Souls in a feudal Japan setting, starring a man that bears an uncanny resemblance to Geralt of Rivia, and you've got Nioh. Skeptical? Well, so was I, but then I played the alpha demo that came out recently, and hot damn, is it shaping up to be an awesome game. The demo came out just at the right time too. I've actually been diving into Dark Souls 1 lately, which I had never finished before. In fact, I could never get into the Souls games until recently when I resolved myself to push through Dark Souls 1, and eventually something finally clicked and I finally felt like I got it, if you know what I mean. Now I'm fairly addicted to the formula, as rage-inducing as it may be sometimes, so I was looking forward to checking out Nioh, and I was pleasantly surprised to find myself having a blast. If you've played Dark Souls, then it won't take long to become acquainted with Nioh. Like in Dark Souls, combat can be as punishing as it can be rewarding, and it revolves around efficient usage of light and heavy attacks, blocks, dodges, as well as careful management of stamina, or chi in this case. Through methodical combat, you go around killing enemies to collect currency that is used for both purchasing things and leveling, this time Amritas instead of souls. If you're killed, you return to the last checkpoint that you activated, this time shrines instead of bonfires. Resting at these checkpoints will fully heal you and refill your primary consumable healing item, this time elixirs instead of estus. Furthermore, these checkpoints will allow access to important menus like the leveling menu or the magic assignment menu. However, shrines will also reset the game world and respawn all slain enemies, also like in Dark Souls. As you kill enemies, you may find loot that they will occasionally drop, and the game features an extensive loot and equipment system that allows deep character customization and development. Weapons and armor will also degrade over time and occasionally require repair via consumable items. Leveling in Nioh is also fundamentally the same as Dark Souls, featuring a menu aesthetic that is very reminiscent, as well as attributes with very familiar effects. And of course, as you level up, currency requirement for leveling will increase. The main goal of Nioh is to explore the world, traverse through the various levels, push forward, and survive. Along the way, you may encounter boss battles in the form of fearsome and ruthless creatures that require special care to eradicate. Succeeding in the endeavor opens up new doors that will allow further progression, and this vicious cycle rinses and repeats until players get to the end of the game. If you've played Dark Souls, this will all sound very familiar to you. Don't be fooled though. While Nioh may mechanically be fundamentally identical to Dark Souls, there are key differences that set this game apart, the most obvious of which is the setting. There is no denying that Tecmo Koei's dark take on feudal Japan is all around compelling. The setting by itself gives Nioh enough of a unique flavor to make it much more than a Dark Souls ripoff. While I have yet to see vistas quite as jaw-dropping as the ones found in the Souls games, Nioh is off to a pretty damn good start visually. Then we have Nioh's unique take on combat, which features an extra layer that changes everything: stances. At any point, players can hold down R1 and use the face buttons to instantly switch between high stance, mid stance, and low stance. Each stance serves a different purpose and feature their own unique moveset. Attacks on high stance are slow but deal a lot of damage. Attacks on mid stance only deal average damage, but they have decent speed and a ton of range. It's the most balanced stance. Finally, we have low stance attacks, which deal very little damage and have the lowest range, but strikes are unleashed quickly and ferociously, which can come in handy. Trust me when I say that you'll find use for all three stances, as there are definitely enemies that are easier to take down with one stance over another. Now, what's cool about stances is that because they can be switched around on the fly, you can actually mix and match and chain attacks from all three stances and pull off some really cool combos. The stances almost add a hint of Devil May Cry in Nioh's stellar combat system. Nioh also features what are called Guardian Spirits. Only one Guardian Spirit can be assigned at a time, and each one comes with a different effect. They not only grant stat boosts, but also allow for a special action called Living Weapon. Think of Living Weapon as the Devil Trigger from Devil May Cry, in which your character becomes superpowered for a limited amount of time. Now, the alpha demo hints at some kind of leveling system for these guardian spirits, but from what I've played, the feature hasn't been fleshed out yet, as there's no obvious way to level them up. Regardless, if you are ever in a pinch, guardian spirits and living weapons will prove to be most useful. And don't worry, the living weapon feature has a long enough cooldown that you won't be able to constantly exploit it to make the game easier. You will definitely want to charge up your living weapon and save it for a special occasion. Also really cool is the way bows work in this game. Nioh actually reserves both trigger buttons for the bow and arrow, L2 to draw the bow and R2 to fire, and while the bow is drawn, you can use the analog sticks to strafe and look around. This system is actually very intuitive and makes it incredibly snappy to switch from melee to ranged mode. It's definitely way better than the way they do it in Dark Souls. Aiming and shooting itself feels pretty good too, with familiar controls akin to your typical shooter. Also cool about Nioh's archery system is that pulling off headshots yields a ton of damage. This actually paves the way for some surprisingly satisfying stealth. Sneaking around and shooting enemies in the head unnoticed is undoubtedly gratifying, and when this mechanic is used correctly, it can make getting around certain areas much easier and much more fun. I can't believe I'm saying this, but with the addition of stances, living weapons, and a more intuitive shooting system, I think I may actually like Nioh's combat system better than Dark Souls. It's definitely faster paced and more actiony. But some of you might prefer Dark Souls' more methodical approach to combat, so at the end of the day, I think it's a matter of personal preference. Nioh is still in alpha stage though, so there's definitely a lot of room for refinement, but if Team Ninja can perfect what is a very solid foundation, we might have a big winner here. Now, there are things I didn't like about Nioh. First is the way stamina, or chi in this case, works. Like in Dark Souls, actions like sprinting, blocking, dodging, and attacking will deplete chi, but in Nioh, if chi is fully depleted, the player character is stunned for a second or two, so for a brief time you're left completely paralyzed and vulnerable, which is more than enough for enemies to make minced meat off of you. I wish Nioh was more like Dark Souls in this respect, where the depletion of stamina still allows you to do things that don't consume stamina, like basic movement. It's frustrating and jarring when everything suddenly halts in the heat of battle. Now, the good news is that this does apply to enemies as well. Another interesting element of Nioh's combat system is that it places a large emphasis on depleting the enemy's chi, which can be done by attacking them directly, attacking their blocks, or by dodging their attacks and letting them spend energy. When their chi is depleted, they too become stunned for a brief time, creating a small window to finish them off. I will admit that this makes combat a bit more strategic, but I can't get over just how jarring it feels when everything just stops in a game where things are constantly moving. It just doesn't feel good for a combat system that's as fast-paced and precise as this, but who knows, maybe it'll grow on me once I become accustomed to it. Another disappointing aspect to Nioh is world design. Whereas Dark Souls features one giant world that is seamless and interconnected, Nioh features individual levels that players must select on a world map menu. Now, don't get me wrong, each level in Nioh is quite extensive and expansive, and there is a sense of interconnectedness within the confines of each level, but being taken to a menu-style world map after a successful mission definitely breaks immersion. Immersion is one area in which Dark Souls excels. They never take you out of the world, and with how beautiful the setting of Nioh is, a lack of a seamless, interconnected world would be a damn shame. Hopefully this is something that Team Ninja can rectify by the time the game launches. Finally, I wasn't a fan of Nioh's loot system. It's very Diablo-esque in that you get a ton of loot and drops featuring minor variety in stats of what are more often than not essentially the same weapons or armor. Most of the weapons and armor you find in Nioh are practically useless. Once in a while, you will obtain a piece of equipment that is significantly more powerful than your previous one, but all weapons of the same type essentially function exactly the same. It doesn't help that Nioh features a scarce amount of weapon variety. The game currently only has 3 types of weapons: katanas, spears, and axes. While each of these 3 classes of weapons have their own unique movesets, all weapons within the same class are identical, save for varying stats and some visual alterations. So any katana you find will function exactly the same, and the same applies to spears and axes. So essentially, you really only have 3 weapons total, except each weapon happens to have various versions of itself that only vary in stats and nothing more. Dark Souls, on the other hand, has fewer drops, but it features an incredible variety of weapons, each of which feel distinct thanks to unique movesets, varying range, and variety in the way they scale to your stats. Almost every weapon in Dark Souls feels like a unique, viable option that you can adapt a playstyle around, whereas in Nioh, weapons are treated like easily replaceable disposables. My hope is that in the final game, they'll scale back on the amount of loot dropped and focus more on making each piece of armor or weapon as unique as possible. There is also no crafting system in Nioh. That would actually solve a lot of its problems. If they can make more weapon varieties that can be upgraded like you can in Dark Souls, then each weapon will actually feel like they have purpose and like each weapon can become just as powerful as all the others. So instead of making the game upgrade the weapons for us via loot, I hope Nioh will allow us to find unique weapons that then we can upgrade depending on what we like best. That's how Dark Souls essentially works, and I definitely like that much better. Alright, so with all said and done, how does Nioh compare to Dark Souls as an overall experience? And I know I'm comparing this game to Dark Souls a lot, but let's face it, this game takes a huge inspiration from Dark Souls, so the comparison has to be made. As I stated before, the two games are identical in many respects. Fundamentally, Nioh does feel like Dark Souls in Japan, which by itself will pique interest. Now, something that I quickly noticed was that Nioh may actually be harder than Dark Souls, at least initially. Enemies are relentless with the way they swiftly string attacks and the amount of damage they output, often leaving you unable to escape sure death. Combat is made even more relentless by its faster speed and pacing. You can definitely feel that Ninja Gaiden influence. Bosses are also ridiculous. I had a ton of trouble with the first boss from the alpha demo, largely because it had so much health, dished out so much damage, had so much range, and moved with such incredible agility. You do eventually adapt to the nuances and pacing of Nioh, however. There will be trials and tribulations, but there comes a point in which you finally get the hang of it, and once you do, combat is incredibly fun and satisfying, especially with the new dynamics that stances bring to the table. I also found the feudal Japan setting to be incredibly refreshing and compelling. The game does fail to impress technically though. Graphics look rough and dated, and frame rates aren't as consistent as I would like them to be. The game is still in alpha though, so it can only look and play better as time passes. That's the main thing to keep in mind with Nioh's demo. It's alpha. For a game in its alpha stage, I have to say it's pretty damn good. If the game is this good now, then holy shit, could this end up being a hidden gem. As someone who just started to get into the Souls series, I could not be more excited for a different take on the merciless formula. If you like Dark Souls or challenging action games, I wholeheartedly recommend you check out Nioh with an open mind. I think the majority of you will not be disappointed. So there you have it, folks, my first impressions of Nioh. Thank you for tuning in. Let us know in the comments below what your experience with Nioh has been like if you've played the alpha demo. And to be further updated on gaming news, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out!